All right, we are going live now and participants are joining. Welcome. Sorry we're running a few minutes late. We had a little technical difficulty. So if everybody could just hang in there with us this morning. A lot of people using these internet lines these days. But welcome to the Vashon Island Chamber of Commerce webinar series, where today we're going to be talking about nonprofits and the CARES Act and what nonprofits can do to get some assistance and funding. And we'll just wait until we have a pretty good quorum here, and then we will go ahead and get started. So if everybody just hang tight, have an extra sip of coffee before we get going, and we will be just a second and we can introduce our panelists today. Just as a reminder for everybody, after the webinars are over, we are posting the slides as well as other support materials on Vashon chamber.com, where you can find all this information, and we also post the video of the webinar there, so you can actually watch it again if there are things that you want to double check on. With that, I'd actually like to get started. I'm Cheryl Lubert. I'm the board president for the Vashon Chamber, and I am very happy to introduce three really great panelists today who are going to be talking about nonprofits and the CARES Act, and they all have quite a bit of insight into what's been happening with CARES, but also have a deep background in nonprofits. So first, we've got Lynn Greiner. We also have Jay Williamson, and also Heather Russell from US Bank. And I'll let them just quickly tell you a little bit about themselves. So Lynn, why don't you kick us off and give us a little bit about your background? Good morning.
Happy to. Good morning. Yes, so I'm Lynn Greiner. I'm a lawyer. I have practiced disability law, but nonprofit law for a long time. I have worked in the nonprofit community forever in many capacities: board member, volunteer, board president. I was the executive director of a nonprofit for 4 years. I've done a lot of legal work for nonprofits. So when this CARES Act was passed, I was interested because I am working with a couple nonprofits who need money. So here we are.
Welcome, Lynn. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Jay, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jay Williamson. I'm a retired attorney. I worked for 24 years before I retired as a trial attorney for the U.S. Department of Labor. I also have been involved on the boards of various nonprofits, primarily on Vashon. And currently I'm very active with Vashon Surge. And that's about it.
That's great, thank you. And we have a repeat presenter here with Heather Russell from US Bank. Heather, how about you? What's your background?
Well, thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, my name's Heather Russell. I'm the friendly branch manager at the US Bank here on Vashon. Been here for 12 years. And in terms of my relationship to nonprofits, I think it's more just a kind of personal passion. I've volunteered in that capacity all through my life. So good to support.
Yep, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that you're actually the treasurer for the Chamber of Commerce, which is also a nonprofit. So thank you for that. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I think, Lynn, you're kicking us off, so take it away.
I am. So we're going to be talking about programs, primarily two programs that are available through the CARES Act, which was passed, I think, the end of March. And CARES is an acronym. It stands for Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. Next slide. So the first program, the one I'm going to talk about, is the Paycheck Protection Program. And then Jay will be talking about what we call EIDL, E-I-D-L, is the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. So I'll start us off with the PPP program. So I'll lay out kind of the requirements, and then Heather, working at US Bank, will talk to you all about how to apply for this. So when the CARES Act was passed the end of March, they reserved $349 billion, B for billion, for small businesses and nonprofits and independent contractors. And it was, the purpose really was to help, and I'm going to just refer to nonprofits throughout this, to help nonprofits keep people on staff. You've all been reading about the huge numbers of people filing for unemployment. Well, this was a way to kind of front load money to nonprofits so you wouldn't have to lay off staff, keep people on for 2 months while we kind of ride this out and see what happens. Next slide. So to qualify, it's pretty simple. You have to have fewer than 500 employees, and probably for Vashon nonprofits, we all qualify under that one. And then you have to be a nonprofit. There's some other ways you can get money: small business, sole proprietor, independent contractor. But like I said, we're going to be talking about nonprofits here. Next slide. The PPP loan is pretty limited in what the money can be used for. And like I said in the beginning, it really is to cover payroll. So you don't have to lay your people off. So you don't have to so they don't have to go on unemployment, to help keep the doors open, right? So the money you have to certify that the money will be used for payroll costs. You can use some of it if you have a mortgage. So for the mortgage interest payments, for rent, utilities, and then you can use some of the money for debts that you incurred beforehand. But it's really those 5 categories. You can't use it for an event or some program thing that you were doing. You have to confine it to keeping your staff on. Next slide. The amount, how much can I borrow? This is all about math, and really this program and the next one we're going to be talking about, it's all about math. So the maximum you can get is $10 million. So if you have a big, robust organization, you're going to be talking about a big number. Of smaller nonprofits, like many on Vashon, the number is going to be way lower. So you look at your payroll costs for last year, and you take the monthly cost and you do 2.5 times that. And you can factor in, so payroll is the salary, but it can be, you include medical leave, sick leave, retirement, insurance, anything like that. So let's say so you have an employee on staff, and the employee gets paid $1,000 a month. So the amount of PPP that you could apply for would be $2,500, right? Next slide. The nice thing about this is that if you follow rules and you use the money for those categories, it's a grant. You don't have to pay it back. So how does that work? You get the money, you have to spend it in 8 weeks after you get it for payroll. So, and at least 75% of it has to be used for payroll. So back to my little math there. So if you get $2,500, you have somebody on payroll for 2 months, the 8 weeks, you're spending $2,000, right? So you have an extra $500, so you can use that for rent or mortgage or any of those other expenses. It will be forgiven if you play by those rules. If you don't, then it's not all forgiven, and it becomes a loan. So as this slide says, 75% of the amount must have been used for payroll. So if let's say you have an employee and you bump their hours down to half-time, then you can't use, then it's going to be treated as a loan, right? Because the person isn't working full-time. So you have to keep the wages for the staff at their level, and you have to keep their hours at the level. Next slide. So this part, how do I apply? I'm going to turn this over to Heather, because she's been helping nonprofits and a lot of small businesses on the island do a number of these applications.
Yeah, absolutely. So in order to apply, you have to find your local bank that is an SBA lender. There are some different institutions. I've heard of Cabbage with a K that are doing SBA lending, and they're kind of different business models. Like what was the other one? I think Square started opening it up so that they could take applications as well. But really, any of your traditional banks that already have an SBA lending are going to be able to take that application. In order to start the process, typically they are sending out an inquiry form. And if you can imagine the kind of mass volumes of people applying right now, you do have to certify in that process that you're going to be using the funds for the correct things, and that it is due to COVID, and that you intend to use it for the payroll reasons, that you're not going to be looking for duplicate funds from some other SBA loan at the same time. You are going to want to prepare some basic financial data. So that's mostly going to be your payroll documents. And then the final loans do end June 30th. However, I do want to update that as of today, the federal $349 billion did get exhausted. So all indications from what I am reading indicate that we will be getting more funds from the government, but we do have to wait for that to actually happen before more applications are taken. So that's kind of the most current news for the PPP.
Next slide for Jay.
Jay,
Hello?
Jay, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, I thought I had unmuted, sorry. I'm going to be talking about the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, which is part of the CARES Act. It's a little bit different than the PPP in that Congress grafted the EIDL, as we call it, onto an existing program for the Small Business Administration to provide loans in the event of disasters like hurricanes, that kind of thing. So rather than going through a local lender, applications under the EIDL are done directly with the Small Business Administration online on their website. Unfortunately, the parameters and targets of the EIDL have changed dramatically since the beginning of the program in late March. Originally, individuals could apply up, or excuse me, nonprofits and businesses could apply up for up to $2 million in a loan paid at 2.75% interest. That has been reduced in the last week to $25,000 maximum. But the major advantage of the EIDL, as it was drafted, was to provide for an immediate $10,000, what really is a grant to qualifying nonprofits that was supposed to be received within 3 business days of the application. That has not happened. The delay is much longer than that. Furthermore, the amount of that $10,000 was originally not limited in terms of size. Within the last few days, the Small Business Administration has limited the $10,000, well, the loan amount, including the $10,000 advance, to $1,000 per employee that the nonprofit has. Furthermore, there's probably, if the funds are not yet exhausted, it's very close to being exhausted. So in terms of being eligible, the nonprofit needs to be a charitable nonprofit under either 501c, D, or E. There has been a lot of discussion amongst the nonprofit community in that the statute under the CARES Act, as well as the original disaster loan statute, talks about private nonprofits. And there was a lot of discussion, well, what the heck is a private nonprofit? Since I'm a 501c3 and as a public charity, very recently, within the last few days, the Small Business Administration has made it clear that all nonprofits, including religious organizations, which is a different twist, qualify for an EIDL loan so long as they have under 500 employees. You have to be in operation before January 31st, 2020. And finally, you need to represent that your nonprofit has suffered substantial economic injury as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide. Now, the EIDL loan is different than the Payroll Protection Program because it allows the money to be used for things in addition to payroll and perhaps sick leave. And listed here are the primary things that people or nonprofits would use the EIDL loan for. Now, there's an exception to that and an exception to the exception, as is often the case. The exception to that is if somebody, oh yes, the next slide, I'm sorry. If somebody receives both a PPP loan and an EIDL loan, you cannot use the EIDL loan money to cover expenses that would be covered by the PPP, primarily payroll. The exception to that exception is that if you receive an EIDL advance, the Small Business Administration will automatically roll that, let's just say optimistically, $10,000 into your PPP loan, and it will then be treated as a PPP loan, and the money can be used according to that. So that first advance money will essentially be an advance if you're applying for both on your PPP loan, assuming you ultimately get that money prior to getting the PPP loan, which I think was the original intent of Congress when they passed the statute. As I mentioned earlier, the application is online. I would suggest taking a look at the application and making sure you have all the information that you need so it can be smoother once you start filling it out. But it's not overly complicated. I don't know, the one thing I did want to mention is it expressly says on the application that you have received a letter from the IRS certifying that you are a 501c or VE or E organization. I know that many of the nonprofits I have worked for over the years, when they're getting started, have kind of been affiliated with another charitable organization so that they could function as a nonprofit while awaiting the IRS determination. If you are in that situation, then I don't believe you can separately apply for an EIDL loan, but would have to have it go through your parent organization. Next slide. And that's, I'm done then.
Great, thank you guys so much. So we want to do Q&A. If everybody on the line could go ahead and add their questions to the Q&A, that'd be great. I have a first question, and I think I'm going to need actually commentary from several of you. Should we apply for the PPP loan in preparation for more funds being released from the government, since obviously there is a discussion going on about that? So I'd be curious as to what your perspective is, and if it's even possible, Heather, from US Bank's perspective.
Yeah, I'll start off with that. So if you have already submitted a inquiry form or an application, like if you have expressed interest, my understanding is that they're going to continue gathering documentation and get you completely prepped to be funded as soon as there is a rollout of more funds. However, if you have not initiated that, they are closing down those links due to the fact that we haven't had those funds actually announced. I do foresee, though, that as soon as the government, if they proceed with another package, that those links would then become active again.
Great, thank you. And Jay, just to reconfirm, you said that the EIDL is still available if people wanted to apply?
As far as I know, up to $25,000, limited to $1,000 per employee.
Okay, great. And a question that came up is, what is the threshold for defining substantial impact?
I'm not aware of any interpretation of what that precisely means. I think if you have suffered as a nonprofit in terms of a significant reduction in charitable donations, if you have had to stop operations or lay off employees because you're not able to do your work because of social distancing, that you would likely meet the test.
Great.
Cheryl, under the PPP, there's an application form. Heather may see this. There's kind of a related question on that. On page 2, it asks you to certify that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. Pretty vague, but I think there's a lot of room there to say that, yes, COVID's affecting our organization.
Great, thank you for that. Also, another question here. What if you are a nonprofit and have costs but no employees? Can you apply? Should you apply?
You can't get payroll protection, the PPP money, because that's, the purpose of that is to keep a employee on. So that program's not available to you. IDLE, perhaps?
Well, I would have said yes, IDLE's available to you until 2 days ago when they announced that you're limited to $1,000 per employee.
Okay. And then another question that came in for the EILD, what comprises an employee, an FTE, or actual people? So I may be interpreting that question a little wrong, but I guess the question is can you combine, do you need a full-time equivalent, or can you have a group of part-time people, or can you have somebody who's maybe just running it, maybe in volunteer, I don't know.
The app, well, not a volunteer. It has to be somebody on a payroll in order for it to be considered an employee. The application asks for number of employees as of January 31st, 2020. It does not break it down into FTE equivalents. So, things it's a moving landscape. And my advice would be to, when you look at the EIDL application, to answer the questions as asked as accurately and honestly as possible. My accurate and honest answer to that would be treating every person on your payroll as an employee, whether they're part-time or not.
Ah, good, that makes sense.
On the PPP application, the question is average monthly payroll. So it doesn't have you break it down by full-time, part-time. I don't know, yeah. Heather, have you had experience with that? Oops, she's muted.
Sorry, it's on mute. So in terms of how the full-time is calculated, is that what you mean?
Or is part-time allowable?
Right. And so I think it does, I think you can look at this like FTE, but it's basically like if you have a 30-hour employee and a 20-hour employee, as long as you're not reducing those, it's being looked at per person and what their payroll costs are. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So as long as you're not reducing the number of hours they're working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have one other question I'd just like to ask everybody on the panel, and that would be, what would your recommendation be to nonprofits today in order to sort of make it through this crisis? What other steps would you take besides, obviously, if you had already applied for the PPP, or whether you've applied for the EIDL, what other things would you recommend to people who are running nonprofits?
Well, one thing I want to mention, which is really related to neither PPP or EIDL, is the CARES Act also changes philanthropy and charitable donations. Last year, there was a cap on what people could deduct on their taxes in terms of charitable donations. I think it was $12,000. Now there's no cap at all, which is encouraging people who are generous to give. So one thing is to really think about fundraising in a new kind of way.
Great, good recommendation, Lynn. Thank you. Jay, how about you? What would you recommend to people?
I'd recommend for the PPP, even though there's no funds available, to contact your local lending provider or bank and get the paperwork that they would need from you in order to apply, and fill out that paperwork and go over it and look up and cross all your T's and dot all your I's, so that if and when more money is put in and banks start processing PPP paperwork again, you can be at the head of the line basically and hand yours in. With regards to EIDL, I believe the Small Business Administration is still accepting applications. I would recommend, if you are interested in getting particularly an advance grant, because that's all forgivable. That up to $10,000 is forgivable if the money is spent as stated. To get that application in. I don't know if EIDL is going to get supplemental funding. I haven't heard that they're actually out of funds. I know that's why they changed the threshold from $2 million to $25,000. So that's an indication that there's limits, but it doesn't hurt to put the application in. Certainly, if they run out of funds and get more funds, applications already in the pipeline would be ahead of ones coming in later. So I don't think it serves you any purpose to hold off and doing that online application soon, if that's the direction you want to go.
That's a great recommendation. I actually had a couple more questions come in.
Can I say something? One more thing on that, Cheryl. You know, if your nonprofit has furloughed staff or laid staff off and they're getting unemployment, if you do end up getting PPP or EIDL, you have until, I think it's June 30th to rehire them. So keep that in mind. So there's different systems here, and you should think about sequencing. So, or if you get EIDL or PPP for 2 months and then there's nothing else, then you might have to furlough people. So it's really, this is about taking care of your business, but also taking care of your people, right?
Yeah, and there's just so many unemployment ways to look at things too. You might want to actually consider whether unemployment would be better for your employee than actually going and doing the paperwork and hopefully getting a PPP loan if you're small. It may actually be better to have people, if they can, apply for unemployment. It's just really looking at the math and the calculation on what's best. And Heather, this is actually a question for you that just came in. Has the Chamber applied for either of these loans or grants, and what's been your experience?
So the experience of the actual processing has been pretty frustrating, for lack of a better word. I mean, if you can imagine, over the last 2 weeks, literally I presented on this 2 weeks ago on April 2nd. Banks have had to create platforms and hire people, and it is partially very manual processes. And so I think there's been a lot of glitching and a lot of frustration in terms of how the system works, and getting emails that says that things are canceled when they're not actually canceled. And for all of this, gosh, you know, I have the utmost empathy, because even from the applicant side, I can completely understand. So I hope, yeah, that answers the question.
Yes, and we did actually apply for the chamber, but it is hopefully going to go through, but we'll see if we have an opportunity for that as well. I will tell you my own personal experience for-profit business, and I bank with Chase, not US Bank, and it was challenging to say the least, and persistence is the word that I would say is what you have to have. Lots of phone calls, lots of patience with the online system. I think I redid the application 6 times because Chase's system went down. I think we're all in the same boat trying to take advantage of these, and I think just being persistent is really what it takes. And Erin Keeper's on the phone from Vashon Adventures, and she's also one of our board members, and she's also my backup on the webinars to make sure we get all the questions. And I know she would be willing to share her experience with the PPP and what happened.
Yeah, so hi everybody. We bank with US Bank, and we went through the online process, applied on the 4th, and it's a 7-step process with US Bank. And we just got accepted a couple of days ago. And once we signed the final documents, we went within less than 24 hours, we had the funding in our bank account. It's, you know, it looks like a loan, and so that was a little confusing in the beginning, but, you know, put the paperwork in, ride through the process. We've also applied for the EIDL, and we also applied for the governor's, the Washington state one. And we're told that it's 4 to 6 weeks out before they're making any determination. So, you know, it's one thing to do with our, a lot of time at home, is to look for these opportunities. There's a lot of good information on the Chamber's COVID page. There's, you know, the Be Prepared group and Sam's group. There's a lot of information coming out, new grant opportunities for different sectors of the public. So, you know, keep your chin up, keep applying. Hopefully more money will be released, but, you know, it did feel really good to get that, just showing that there was some light at the end of the tunnel and there was some completion. So hang in there, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. And I do have another question that came in that I'd like to ask the panel. If we have at least one employee, should we apply to both? Apply to both. Is there a downside to that if both the EIDL and also the PPP when it reopens? Is there a downside to that if we qualify for both?
I don't think so. I think I apply for both. That's my advice.
Yeah, you know, I have to tell you, we have a list of about, I think, like 15 different resources and links on the Chamber site where people can apply for all these different things. And I think that is sort of that's sort of my general take from all of the things that we've been doing on these webinars. Take the time to apply for as many as you will qualify for, because I think Erin's experience is a great experience, but I think that there's lots of different funds that are opening up and lots of different aid that is showing up. So I think apply, be persistent. I know it really can be a little disheartening, but I think that's the best thing we can all do. And also keep our fingers crossed that the government opens up another payroll protection program piece for small businesses. Go ahead. Jen.
Can I add one thing on that? With the EIDL, the only distinction is anything you receive over $10,000 is actually a loan. It's not subject to being forgiven. So if paying the 2.75% interest, and they have payment plans that can extend out for years, is something that is potentially going to negatively impact your cash flow in any way, then I would think about that. But certainly, I agree. Definitely apply up to $10,000. So,
Yeah. And even as a loan amount, the loan percent for the PPP was only 1%, and that's much better than most business or commercial loans.
Absolutely. And my advice is check the SBA website. We've been doing that, and this has been nuts in terms of how it's just been evolving kind of daily. I think we can all attest to that. So it was, yeah, it hasn't been ideal in terms of the process, to say the least. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully, and the news is covering it too. So
And Heather, oh, sorry, Lynn. And Heather, another question came in. Who else, what other banks are offering, what other lenders are there for nonprofits besides Chase and US Bank? Who else would you recommend people look to?
Sure. Well, in terms of SBA lenders, you should be able to Google a list of them. But for nonprofits, I mean, really just any commercial bank, you can go and check in with them about whether they lend to you.
Okay. And then Barb had a clarification question here. She said she didn't catch it. Was that over 10,000 not forgiven, but an actual loan? Is that with the EIDL or the PPP?
that's the EIDL.
Okay. And for the PPP, if it's used for payroll, 75% is forgiven?
well, the whole thing can be forgiven if at least 75%, if you spend it within 2 months, the 8 weeks, and 75% of it goes to payroll, and you can sort of document that the other expenses went for rent and utilities, then the whole thing's forgiven.
Okay. Another question that came in, does anybody on the panel have any familiarity with Kabbage? They apparently help applicants with no banking ties. Anybody know about Kabbage? Kabbage?
I have worked with Kabbage.
Kabbage is that they an online.
On the spectrum of invasiveness,
Rachel?
we're still on the pretty.
Yeah, I have worked with Kabbage. I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting to unmute. My husband's in the room, so let me, he's talking. We can go to another spot. I have worked with Kabbage on lines of credit, and it's true, you don't have to have a banking tie. The more connections that you do have that you can share with them, so that you can show your credit background and history, you basically link your accounts with them. And they'll link every type of account that you have online. They'll be happy to, the more that they can see, the better your rates are. But no, you can do it with no banking ties at all. It's a very quick and easy online application. I had a really great experience working with them.
Okay, great. Heather, what were you going to add?
Yeah, that just pretty much covers it. I just know from a higher level that they are, you don't have to have a presence with them prior. So you can apply without an existing relationship. And they're 100% on.
Okay, great. So with that, I think we're going to bring our webinar to a close. I just want to remind you about our next couple webinars that are coming up. Next week, we're just going to have an open forum. Sam Williams from the EOC is going to join me, and we're going to have an open forum about tenant and landlord issues and just talk about what people are doing, what they're seeing, how they're navigating things. It's not going to be a specific webinar, and everybody's going to be able to join in on that conversation, so it's not going to be in the same format. We'll be able to see everybody's faces and have an open conversation. Also, Allison Shirk is going to be doing grant writing on the April 23rd. I think that might be of interest to people who are in the nonprofit sector, how to get through that. And I think that would be very helpful. I know I'm going to be taking lots of notes when Allison goes through that, because certainly something that we need to know. And then we also have 4 cultures. Heather Dreyer and Brett Fetzer are going to be talking about release funding for arts, culture, and preservation groups on April 28th. That's a Thursday. I just want to remind everybody that the Chamber website, we are keeping lots of COVID information up there, and we're updating it regularly. And so not only do we have a comprehensive list of vetted COVID information and business resources, as well as a list of our webinars and links, but we also have a virtual essential Vashon business guide, restaurant resource guide for who's open and who's delivering and how that's all working for Vashon. And like I said earlier, definitely something to look at, the list of all the different funds, grants, programs that are available on that, on the VashonChamber.com. We're trying to make sure that our community has access to this information as soon as it's available. Additionally, we do have a new Ask the Experts resource, and we have somebody who, we have 2 people who are going to be offering support, Heather being one of them, around finance and SBA loan support. And if you go to the Ask the Expert, they have office hours and their email and phone there so that you can get in touch with them about your individual situation. So it's an opportunity to get one-on-one questions answered. And then marketing and website support, as well as employment issues support. And Deborah Diamond is going to be supporting us there. And actually we have somebody else who's going to be joining to help Deborah, because I know she has quite a few people calling her now as well. So we have a great Ask the Experts program up and running to help everybody in the community. And then the other thing that we have is our virtual networking coffee. Everybody can bring their coffee on Friday mornings at 8, get to know other businesses, hear what's going on in the community, and brainstorm how we can get through this together. One of the things that the Chamber is very focused on, and we've really had to pivot, is providing resources and help to really ensure that all of our businesses survive this and hopefully at the end actually thrive. And in fact, one of the things that Rachel's going to be doing on this Friday's coffee is actually helping people understand how do you actually update your Chamber profile so that your people know what's accurate about your business. So with that, I want to thank Lynn and Jay and Heather for taking the time this morning, and thumbs up to Rachel and also Erin for always being here as my backup. And I hope to talk to all you guys again on Tuesday. Thank you guys so much for joining us this morning. Have a great rest of the week and stay healthy, please.
You.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, okay, okay.